I think I'm at the point where I'm now able to say I'm a Will and Grace fan. It took me a while to get here. The first half of the first season, I just didn't care for. And then, maybe not coincidentally, around the time we got to the unsinkable Mommy Adler with Debbie Reynolds, I started to change my attitudes towards it. And I was really looking forward to watching the start of season 2, especially since at the end of season 1, it was kind of suggested that there would be some changes, and this is actually established very quickly. So today I will be discussing season 2, episodes 1, 2, and 3, and there will of course be spoilers from now as I go through some of the main plot points, share some positives, any negatives, but I can tell you now there are no negatives, no real room for improvement, no real criticisms. So we start off with Season 2, Episode 1, Guess Who's Not Coming to Dinner, directed by the wonderful James Burrows. They are all directed by the wonderful James Burrows. And at the end of the previous season, Will and Grace realised that they can't live together anymore. And my question was, well, where is Grace going to live? Well, in this episode, she's moved literally across the hall from him, which was convenient. And she's still constantly going over to Will's, and he ends up telling her that she can't do anything without him, which is harsh, but he had a point. She was constantly over there. And he said this while he was naked, reading in his apartment. It was quite an interesting choice, but it worked well. And she said that she can, and in fact, she's throwing a dinner party. And Will's not invited, which also seems quite harsh, but nevertheless, this is what's happening. And her friends arrive, including Karen, and the dinner party is maybe not what anybody expected. It's probably not the best idea to throw a dinner party when you've just moved in and have no furniture, but she ends up having a picnic on the floor with cold soup and no seats. A delightful moment when she falls into a box at one point, and it's good fun. And she realises that actually she does need Will, and maybe living across the hall is living too close to him still. Maybe it's not enough of a change. If she's not able to stay away from the apartment, from Will's apartment, maybe she needs to move further away. So I don't know what the plans are for that going forward, but I'm keen to find out. It's a good episode, not a bad way to start off season 2. We then come to season 2, episode 2, Election. And I thought this one was okay. The main narrative, the election part, is interesting, but I actually enjoyed what I think is the subplot more, so I'll talk about that in a moment. But the election focuses on the fact that Will is president of the Tenants Association, and Grace is kind of annoyed because basically nobody, including Grace, has a working fireplace in the building, but Will does. He had his fixed just before things changed, and Grace doesn't think this is fair. So there's a meeting with the other tenants, which I really liked. I'd love it if they began to involve the tenants more frequently and we got to get to know them a little bit more. This is something that they've done slightly, usually when somebody new moves into the building or they'll bump into somebody random in the elevator, but it never really goes beyond that. So I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into the other tenants. One of the great things about the characters living in an apartment building is that there's a great opportunity to have so many other characters and personalities, and I hope they do a little bit more with that as the show progresses. That's me assuming they both carry on living in this apartment until the end of time. And Grace ends up running for president against Will, and I was really keen to find out what would happen, and ultimately it's a tie, and they have to go to the hospital to ask a tenant who's lying in his hospital bed to decide on the winning vote. And I'll say what happens with that in a moment. But there's another bit that I really, really love, because they're being quite unpleasant to each other, Will and Grace. They're in competition. They're not being very kind. But there was a moment when Grace seemed like she'd been hurt, and Will immediately rushed to make sure she was okay. In that moment, the mask of this bitterness, this competition is just dropped, and it's just Will, Grace's friend again. And then, of course, it goes back up again, and the election continues. So I thought that was a really interesting moment. And at the very end of the episode, I love this, I thought it was brilliant. The tenant in the hospital bed likes Grace. Grace wins. Grace is president of the Tenants Association. And well, Will is also very happy, because all of a sudden Grace realises that it's going to be a lot of work. And Will's kind of happy to be relieved of all of those responsibilities, and Grace never really thought about what it would actually entail, so I quite liked it. I thought it was Good fun. We then have the subplot. Immigration is keeping tabs on Rosario and Jack. So they're having to stay with Karen. They're staying at Karen's. And, well, we have a lot of fun scenes with Jack. I would have liked Rosario to have been in it a little bit more. She was only in it a little bit, but I'm hoping and or assuming that she's in it more going forward. And there's this few seconds of suspense when Karen says to Jack, sometimes bad things happen to good people, and sometimes bad things happen to you. And of course the question is, what bad thing has happened? We have suspense for like 3 seconds, and then we find out that his bird, Jack's bird, flew out of the window. And he's obviously devastated, so Karen's going to take him out to buy new things, including a Rolex to cheer him up. And, well, just before they leave, Jack looks out the window and the bird is right there. It didn't fly away. I mean, maybe it did, but it came back. It's certainly right outside the window. But he puts the blinds down and skips off to get his new Rolex, not telling Karen. And then he ends up hiding the bird in the closet later on, still taking advantage of Karen's generosity and, I guess, guilt for what happened. And then I didn't see this coming. I really thoroughly enjoyed this. It turned out that Karen knew, not necessarily the whole time, but for the majority of the time, that the bird was back and Jack was just taking advantage. And this is because there were hidden cameras everywhere, which is very creepy. But I didn't see it coming, and I found it to be really, really delightful, so I had a lot of fun with that. I thought Election was a great episode. Yes, I enjoyed the main narrative. We had some really good moments between Will and Grace, and I really liked how it concluded. But for me, the fun was with Jack, and just the performance there, I thought it was brilliant. So, a really decent episode. And then the final one in this batch, we have Season 2, Episode 3, Das Boob, and Grace is on the front page of the art section in the paper, and because of the angle, her breasts look much bigger than they actually are. And then she finds out that she has missed a phone call from either John Gregorio or Don Dorio. I was so confused by this, and I did some research, and I didn't get many answers. So, on IMDb, the character is credited as Don Dorio, and I found photos, screenshots, of the writing on the wall saying Don Dorio, because Karen wrote the character's name and phone number on the wall. But in the UK box set, at the very least, the wall says John Gregorio, and Grace says John Gregorio. She doesn't, it's not like they dubbed over what she originally said but didn't change the writing. It is the version where she said John Gregorio, and that's what's written on the wall. So at some point, they changed it. I don't know if they changed the writing in post and dubbed over the audio, or if they actually shot it twice. I have no idea, but I would love to know why. What's the significance of that change? Why would they change him from John Gregorio to Don Dorio? I have no idea. So I was very confused by that. But I can confirm that the UK box set, at least the one that I have, does call him John Gregorio. So I don't really know what to call the character throughout this, but nevertheless, it's somebody from high school, and it's somebody Grace was very attracted to, and he wants to invite her out, and she ends up going to this art show, and there are some suggestions that maybe he's only asked her, maybe he's only phoned her, because in the newspaper it looked like she had quite large breasts. Is he only interested in her now because of that? Well, Grace is nervous to find out, so she ends up wearing a water-filled bra, which never seems like a good idea. And what happened next, I thought was actually really obvious, but I didn't see it coming. Once it happened, I thought, yeah, that was obvious, wasn't it? But for some reason, it didn't occur to me. When she's at the art show and she's looking at Gregorio's paintings, one of her boobs leaks, and then the other one does. And it's fine. I didn't think it was too funny, but I did like Grace's response to it. I thought that we had some interesting physical comedy there that definitely worked quite well. And I think Gregorio or Dorio wasn't interested in the size of her breasts. I genuinely got the impression that he was interested in her. Maybe he was impressed that she was in the paper. Maybe that's what drew him to phoning her. But I don't think it was because of her physical appearance. And yeah, it was fine. It was not too bad. again, I'm just mostly confused about why they changed it from John Gregorio to Don Dorio. If anybody knows, please feel free to let me know. We also have a subplot that actually ties in really nicely because Jack found out that Will once hooked up with his ex, Walter, which I have to say, not a good look for Will. And Jack is particularly devastated because Walter was the love of his life. So Will arranges it for Walter to turn up at the art show and reunite him with Jack. And he arrives, and Jack reveals he was thinking of somebody else. That's not who he thought was Walter. So I didn't see that coming. That's not what I expected, and I rather enjoyed that as well. So it's a good episode and slightly confusing, but definitely really, really good fun. If I were to rank these, the reason I only did 3, by the way, I usually do 4 episodes in a discussion, and the reason I've only done 3 is because the next one has a very special guest appearance, and I didn't know that this person would be in the show again, so I want to talk about that one separately. So just 3 for today, and to rank these ones, I would say Guess Who's Not Coming to Dinner as a whole, but Jack's story in Election, I'd kind of rank both of those top, and then Das Boob would be third. It's not bad, but out of the 3, it's my least favourite, but I had a lot of fun with these. I think this is definitely a really strong start to season 2 of Will and Grace, and I'm very looking forward to watching the next episode.